Hello, FewCandy here, and welcome back to Anima Zoo. And today we're going to be adding another habitat into our zoo, and this time for the Amur Leopard. So a little bit of a change from our red and European fallow deer habitat last time out. But I have to say, I think this turns out into possibly my favourite habitat I've ever built in this game. So I'm super excited to show you this. So the principle of it is something that kind of just came to me in my head. I wanted a really large, modern cage exhibit, essentially. And I couldn't really find any exact inspiration that really fitted the bill in terms of exactly what I wanted. So I've sort of made this up as I go along. But here you can see we're starting with just the basic cage piece. And what I want to do is add a really kind of very eye-catching modern architectural twist to it, which we'll come on to in just a second. But starting off with the basic cage, I just used a 4x4 plaster wall to measure this out so that we could make sure we were doing it in 4-metre segments. So just using the plain 4-metre mesh piece, alongside some of the bog standard generic metal beams, recoloured into black. I just feel like it's more appropriate for a cage like this. You're not going to find cages with blue metal bars in it very often, I don't think. So you can see here we're just framing off the mesh with these pieces to make sure the mesh is kind of supported. And it looks realistic, it's not just loads of floating mesh with no supports in it, which wouldn't happen, particularly if an Amur Leopard run into it, then you're going to want some beams in there. I also wanted to make the cage quite tall so that we could get some big trees inside it and some big tall climbing apparatus as well for the leopards, because obviously that's a key part of what they require in a habitat as well. So I think we did end up making it 8 metres tall in total. And I wanted to kind of frame the mesh at the top so it made it a little bit more interesting. So we add an extra bar essentially at the top, which we then copy over into the roof, and it looks kind of cool by the end of it. So yeah, what I'm doing is just setting up the first singular piece for it so that we can then copy it around all of the different walls. So once you've set up a piece like this, particularly if it has a wall piece in it, it's very easy to copy and paste and just fill it out into a big square cage. However, of course, my brain not working at the time, I decided not to include the wall piece in it, which made it a little bit more tricky. But having copied over one piece and aligned that correctly, it was then much easier because I could copy the two and they kind of fell into place much easier and aligned as I used the X functions to move them across. Now, I didn't want to have just a kind of standard square cage, me being me. I wanted to make it a bit more interesting, and I had this idea to sort of have this almost octagon or half an octagon end to it, so that guests could walk all the way around and kind of view into the cage, not just from the front side of it, but essentially all the way around. So that's what I wanted to do there. I also wanted to have a hard back wall so that we could put staff facilities and things like that behind it. So it's not a 360 cage. We're going to use plaster pieces against the back wall and a little bit along the side walls. We'll come on to that in a second. There's a sort of feature that I'm going to put up against that side wall. We're going to have a raised cave viewing area where the Amur Leopards would go to sleep, and guests can walk up a path and view into the cage sort of from the top, or into the cave at least from the top. So I just wanted to make sure all these plaster pieces were nicely aligned from that. And then before I got too much further, I decided to actually check the size of what I was doing here, because the Amur Leopards need a fair amount of space, so you can only have 2 adults actually in a habitat together, so it's not like a huge group. But they do require a decent amount of space, not as much as our deer habitat last time certainly, but equally we probably want this to be 1,000 metres squared. So I checked the size of it, realised it was way too small, so I went back to the drawing board with my cage. And so this is where I kind of extended out this octagon viewing area onto the end to make it much larger this side. We also do move the back wall back as well to add more space there, because it really was much too small on the initial version of it. You can lay down your null barriers, or lay down, you know, even just a temporary regular barrier in a rough shape that you want, and then form your custom barriers or your cages around that to make sure it is the right size. So there's ways to make it less complicated. But sometimes we don't always think about the easiest route when we're doing this. So that's what happened here. Now I do move back out that plaster wall at the back in a minute. It sort of looks like a bit of an odd shape at the moment, but that does change. But coming onto the roof, yeah, what I did was just copied the front cage pieces up to the roof so that we get this sort of 3 bars right on the top corner of it, which I quite like the effect, so like all sort of close together. I felt like that added extra support in those key kind of corner areas. And then we just copy the mesh and bar pattern all the way across the roof. This is pretty simple actually for the main kind of square rectangular area of the cage. Very, very simple. We can just keep copying the same patterns. When it comes to the much smaller corners, it's a little bit more fiddly. And it does take quite a lot of time adding in those much, much smaller little mesh pieces to fill in some of these intricate corners. But it all came together and we got the complete kind of outline of the cage. So like I mentioned, I wanted to add this big kind of modern feature, architectural feature to it to give it a bit of a twist. So it's not just this kind of bog standard cage as you walk around as a viewing guest. And part of that, I wanted to add a glass window viewing area into it so that you don't always have to view through the mesh bars. So, you know, photographers coming in or whatever could take perhaps better pictures as long as the reflection wasn't too bad. So what I decided to do was create, out of plaster pieces, recoloured into a sort of a slightly, very slightly greyish white colour, which I think kind of fits with the main building of the zoo as well. So even though this architecturally is very unlike most of the other buildings we've put in this zoo, again, I'm trying to bring in some of those theming similarities to other parts. So again, the white plaster, it was white limestone actually that we used on the main building, but they look very, very similar indeed. And the reason why I went for plaster pieces is because there are so many different variations of it, so many different small panels, that it's really useful to use the plaster pieces when it comes to something a little bit different and quite custom. So that's what we chose here. So what we're going to do with it is we're going to create essentially a roof and a front that you can see I've already built down the front of the cage. That's where the windows will go for the guests to view in. And then across the top we'll have a solid plaster ceiling. But what I wanted to do to give it that little extra twist was to angle it. So the whole ceiling is going to be very slightly slanted, and that front wall as well is going to be slanted kind of back in on itself down towards the cage. So yeah, to do this, I decided to build it all flat first so that it was nice and simple, and then angle the entire piece afterwards. So the key thing when I was building this was to make sure I was using the panel pieces and not the gridded wall pieces, because they obviously can't be rotated and angled away from their plain vertical nature. So everything had to be panels. But it was pretty simple. We just create this really plain flat surface out of this white-ish plaster. And then I came in and created some holes for some glass windows, again just to let a bit of light in through there, which I thought would be a nice touch. And I did make the mistake here of actually putting in sort of proper glass flat roof pieces, and of course they won't angle, so I do later come in and switch these out for panels so that we can of course rotate it to get our modern slant with the roof a little bit later on. And then to add a little bit of extra feature to it, I wanted to add these kind of support beams essentially running down the sides of it, almost like it was suspended from them, even though obviously that wouldn't be the case. So I used some of the plaster trimming alongside some of the metal beams, the kind of generic metal beams, recoloured into the white colour to go along with the rest of the build to create this kind of beam structure along the edges of it. It's a little bit hard to describe, but you'll see it once it's all in. So we use the metal poles to act as posts towards it, and then the plaster trimming as the main kind of structural support beam, I suppose. It's a little bit odd. Again, this was all coming from my head, so I'm not sure how architecturally possible it would be, but it feels right to me, and I think it looks really, really fantastic by the end of the build. And you'll see me here just adding a few extra beams versus the version that I copied over, because I felt like it needed a little bit more support and a little bit more decoration on this than the original kind of version of this support beam that I'd done. So once we've done that, we copy it across to the other side and also up the back as well, which I think just adds a nice feature. And also it kind of fits in with the cage element of the black and the mesh around it as well, which I quite enjoyed. Where we've got those extra bars around the edge with extra supports, that's where I thought it kind of fitted into this. Now coming on to the angling, of course, we wanted to select all of these pieces. You'll notice I have switched out the glass for panels at this point, having realised my error there. And then what we do is just very gently turn it and try and get it into the right angle that looks kind of appropriate for what we want here. So I didn't want it too extreme, I wanted it relatively subtle. but also raised up from where the mesh roof sits. So yeah, that was an important element to me, to make sure that it was raised at both ends, so at the back of the cage and also at the front. And the other reason why I really like this as well is because it's sort of similar to our main entrance building, where we've got the two kind of dynamic layered slanty roofs. So again, we're trying to bring in some of that theming that we've got elsewhere into the zoo into our architecture within our habitats. If that makes any sense at all. That was what was going on in my brain when I was planning out this design, at least. So once I got that into the right place, it was then time to start on the front panel, and actually the original plaster wall that I put in there was really just kind of a holding place, so that disappears in a minute. And again, because I want to angle this front wall as well to sort of mirror the angle of the roof, I again came in and used all panel pieces for this so that we get that rotate function. And I wanted to copy the structural beam support pattern all the way down the front of the building as well, just to add a bit of consistency, so they run essentially from the back all the way down the front, down into the ground. So it's kind of, yeah, adding that extra support there, which I think kind of works and helps to add a bit of consistency. Now, before I tilted the front, I did also want to put in, of course, the front windows. So again, I just used some glass panel pieces for this. So we just create a little hole in our plaster panels, add in some glass panel pieces to that, and then we can select all of the pieces and start to tilt it. Definitely not on angle snap, because 15 degrees was way too much. We wanted it to be a little bit more subtle than that. And I wanted it to almost be a right angle at the top, so that kind of had to be eyeballed, which was a little bit tricky. And I don't think it ends up perfectly there, but it's not too far off at least. So once we got that in, there was a little bit of shifting around needed in terms of getting those support beams all lined up with the roof section. Going down the front, of course, we come in and delete the cage elements from the inside section here, so it is just running straight from the cage into the big raised plaster section. And then we come in with some smaller plaster panel pieces just to fill in the gaps in between the roof of the cage and the sides of our brand new tilted ceiling here. And same goes for the front as well, so filling in those little gaps. Because the front now pushes out from the side of the cage, we needed to fill in those little gaps just nice and simply with some plain plaster pieces. And that's why they work so well, because they're just so versatile. So many different sizes, and also overlapping them, you don't get any kind of weird texture breaking. So yeah, really handy from that. And you can see very briefly what it looks like inside here, and it's pretty awesome. Like, I really love it. Feels super modern, totally different to what we've seen elsewhere in the zoo so far, at least. But that's definitely the kind of dynamic that I wanted to go for in this zoo. So I wanted most of it to feel pretty old and very natural in terms of the landscape around the zoo. But then we come in and there's been big investors and big donors who have donated to create these absolute crazy masterpieces, whether it be modern or brutalist or various different architectural pieces around the zoo. And just very quickly before we move on, here you can see a little shot of what it looks like from the main plaza viewing point down in towards this habitat, just sitting kind of right at the bottom of the waterfall path down into the lakeside zone. It's definitely a feature for this view, and of course we're going to have the lake right behind this building as well. So coming back to the building and adding a few little feature touches around it, I wanted to do this sort of modern art thing on the main kind of viewing wall at the front here. So I decided to use these actually, I think it's almost like a trellis piece from the conservation pack, but it looks like leopard spots to me, is what I was going for, to try and create a kind of modern interpretation of a leopard with these. So I don't know if it actually works, but in my brain it definitely did. So I kind of have the tail on the left hand side and the rest of the body with a leg and a head kind of hunched over like it's almost ready to pounce. Very subtle, I know. And then I just repeat this over to the other side as well. So we've got two leopards kind of facing off against each other right above this big glass viewing window that you can see here. And I realised actually before we had tilted it, I hadn't come in and added in the usual window supports that I do. So I use a big temple block at the bottom of the window and just some of the black beams that we've used around the cage at the top for added support. I do also later come in and add some of the European marquee beams just around the window edges to add that little bit of extra realism to our glass panes, as I've mentioned before. And then we add in this little shelter roof to it, just using some of the metal plank panel pieces. and some of the big black metal beams to add support, again angled in, so I'm really liking all this kind of combination of different angles on this particular habitat. And the reason why I wanted this shelter here is because having gone to, well actually an ape rescue centre very recently, sometimes it's very difficult to see in through the glass because the sun's shining on it in different locations. So I want to give our guests the best viewing opportunities and shade out some of that sunshine here. Now coming on to the next bit, which I mentioned earlier, which is we're going to have this raised cave sleeping area for the leopards on the side of the habitat here. So I wanted the guests to walk right up to this and be able to view into the cave. So we're just adding a little bit of pathing down the side here, which was tricky, as paths always are, but making sure we've got the option to have curved raised paths on, taking off angle snap, things like that definitely help here. And we did eventually connect it up, again without stairs, so it's fully accessible to all guests coming to our zoo. And then of course I wanted to get rid of the default barriers because they were a little bit intrusive, I think, next to the cage. And I also changed it up to a wooden path, so it was more of a kind of wooden platform running up here as well. Then in terms of the main path, what I wanted was the main path to connect on round the habitat. So when you're on the main path, you're not actually going right up to the edge of the habitat to view for the leopards, because this is quite a high profile, highly rated animal. So the popularity of it for guests is going to be quite big. So the main pathway actually runs slightly further away, but then does come up next to the octagon end of the cage, so that you can kind of see in from there. But if you want to go into more of the prominent view areas, you're going to have to go off onto the little gravel path for that viewing. So again, that just sort of separates out your guests around the zoo so that anyone walking around it doesn't have to walk on those very busy paths that are going to be particularly busy around the outskirts of the habitat. Now coming back to the cave viewing area, of course, this path is right up next to the edge of the habitat, which is incredibly dangerous when you've got Amur leopards in there. You don't want them kind of poking their claws out through the cage, or people poking their fingers in. So I changed up this side of it all to glass so that there was a absolutely solid barrier between the guests and the leopards. And you will have noticed as well the little gravel path was placed slightly further away from the edge of the cave, and we're going to add fencing in just a second to make sure that those guests can't reach in. Now on the back of the habitat, I wanted to sort of extend out some of our plaster walling to create a little bit of a staff area, and I think I am going to change this up in a later episode, because what I would like to do to add a bit more realism is add a kind of dangerous animal holding pen area, which we didn't do in this section here. All we've got is a keeper hut, a veterinary surgery and a staff room, and a large keeper hut and large staff room at that, because this will serve some of the other habitats that we're going to have around this area as well. But quite like how this sort of low area with the little corridor and the round plaster viewing windows out works. I think it's quite a nice staff area because those windows are going to look out onto the lake as well. So here you can see we're coming onto the safety fence as mentioned, so this is just to keep the guests away from the edge of the cage for their safety. So we've just used some plain simple wooden pillars, I think from the conservation pack for this, with a little bit of our mesh fencing in the bottom of it, which I think goes quite nicely in keeping with some of the themes that we've used around the deer habitat as well, and around the rest of the zoo. So quite like how this works, and of course we run this the entire way around where we've got our mesh cage areas just for absolute safety. We don't want any guests going up to that barrier. Now coming on to the internal aspect of the habitat, I wanted to kind of bring in some of that modern architecture and create a bit of a man-made climbing platform for the leopards. So what I wanted for this was a series of semicircles kind of cascading right from the bottom of the habitat all the way up to the top, because we've got quite a nice height here to use as well. So I used the old famous mud pillar trick to create a full circle, separated out all of the items and combined just the semicircle into a little group, and then started to move it into the habitat in place. So yeah, like I said, I wanted this cascading effect. So I started up near the top to make sure that was the right height, placed in a semicircle there, and then just started to kind of work my way down in a bit of a tiered, layered fashion. So this looks really super odd, and actually this was the one thing I wasn't wholly convinced on when I'd finished the habitat. I think I had something else a little bit different in my mind to how it actually came out. But it's kind of a cool feature, so I did decide to leave it in. And once we've got our semicircles in place, we just come in with more plaster pieces to fill in some of the gaps and create some straight walls back to the back of the habitat. So again, you can see in this little area here where the keeper gate is, I definitely think kind of changing this up to more of a holding pen, something safe for the keepers as well to work into, so they can put the leopards somewhere and then go into the habitat to clean, would be much more realistic. So I think we are going to come in and change that up at a later date. And then with all these semicircles, to create a kind of cascading climbing platform out of it, I decided to fill them all with mulch. And then we just add some of the little climbable platform panel pieces in to be able to make sure that the leopards can go from one layer to another, even though they can jump really far, as you might have just seen in the corner of your eye, so it doesn't really matter anyway. I also add in a large climbing frame, as you've just seen, and also a water pond at the other end of the habitat as well, in the octagon end. So you can see the leopards actually swim, so they do like to swim, so I think that's quite a nice feature to add in there. And now again, I am playing with the terrain requirements on for all of these animals, so I wanted to come in and make sure we got rid of a lot of the long grass, because they don't seem to like that at all. They like a lot of rock, soil and short grass, which is like a little bit annoying from a detailing perspective. So I did actually end up turning off plant requirements for this, because I did want to get in that sort of slightly jungle feel with lots of long grass in around the habitat. And so now we're coming on to building the cave, and I just used lots of tiger rocks for this so it blends into the actual theme of our map, and created this big flat platform which the sleeping beds would go on, with a big solid rock roof, and then kind of cascaded rocks in around it to make it look a little bit more natural. So this looks super odd right now, but it does kind of blend in once we've got all of these larger rocks on the outside to make it feel a little bit more cave-like. And of course we needed the leopards to have some way to get in here, so from the big climbing platform that I put in, I decided to add this little bridge feature. So again, using some of the climbable bridges, which I did recolour to a slightly more natural wood look, so they could climb over these bridges and straight into their little sleeping cave up here. So yeah, really kind of like how this turned out. It's a very large rock feature in the side of their habitat, which again was another reason why it was really important to make sure it was big enough, because I knew we were going to come in and fill it with quite a few things that would limit the actual walkable space for the animals. And then I really like this little bit in front of it. We create a kind of, again, a climbing area out of the rocks, so they can climb up the sides of the rocks onto a little flat piece as well here. So lots of different sort of areas within the main habitat for them to explore and enjoy. And now coming onto the outside as well, what I wanted to do to cover up this viewing platform, the raised viewing platform here into the cave, is I decided to actually use some of the temple wall pieces, the broken down ones. And I mixed in a dark grey plaster wall in behind it, because there's lots of gaps within these walls, which we kind of don't want here. We don't really want guests to be able to see through into nothing underneath our viewing platform. So to add a little bit of grout essentially to it, I decided to put this dark plaster wall in between all of those pieces. And then as we come down the slope, I just used some of the smaller temple brick pieces to create a nice kind of gentle slope down. Mix this in with some of the broken pieces as well to add a little bit more dynamicism. And this ends up being possibly one of my favourite views in the zoo so far, and that's saying something from the viewing platform actually. But as you come down past the waterfall around the edge of the deer habitat, you get this view across to this temple wall and across to the leopard cage, the leopard habitat, and it looks really awesome. I'll show you that at the end. And now because this temple wall wasn't quite tall enough to kind of make an actual safety barrier for the guests, we just added in some very simple fencing using the Indonesian stain poles actually, but recoloured to black. So they've got this kind of worn feeling to them, which I quite like. And again, because we've got this glass wall here, I wanted to add a little bit of sun protection so that guests could actually clearly see inside the habitat. So I just used a very simple planetzoo wooden plank for this. Copied it all the way along the outside of our glass windows here, and then added a couple of little angled support beams going back into the wall using the European marquee beams again, the nice thin metal ones which work so well for elements like this. And then to help this big random temple wall blend a little bit more into the more natural environment around it, we added quite a few little ivy patches and some hanging ivy onto the edge of it. We also add some flowers and some trees out the front of it as well, so it's sort of slightly hidden away, but a nice little feature wall nonetheless there. Now outside the front of the cage, in between the fencing, I didn't want to block the view by doing anything too big here, so I decided to bring in a similar technique to what we used around the main entrance plaza, using the faux rock kind of piles, some of the large ones mixed in with some of the small ones, to create a slightly more rocky flower bed out here. I've also coloured the ground, you'll notice dirt as well, so we're getting rid of some of that green around the edge here, but then adding a bit more green in through some alpine currants and also some saltwort bushes as well into here, which is just a nice kind of very simple touch to add something into that sort of dead space but not block the view of the leopards on the climbing platforms and things behind it. And then the final touch was adding a few aster flowers into here as well, which I do actually put inside the habitats. They're from the continent and the biomes that the leopards actually want, so it's kind of appropriate for them. And these work so well. Any of the flower patches actually from the conservation pack do work so well up against a gravel path. So that's what I wanted to do here, rather than having any path borders or anything like that, is actually just overspill a little bit of this grass with the paths, and it just looks super natural, super pretty, really like it, and it takes away a lot of that harsh edge of the pathwork, which sometimes I don't like and feels a little bit unnatural. So yeah, these flowers, absolutely fantastic. If you don't have the conservation pack, do please consider using my instant gaming link to pick it up. There's some fantastic discounts on there for all of the planetzoo DLCs. That is linked in the description below. And then finally, to keep guests from the main path from just walking straight over the grass, not that they would in-game anyway, but potentially in real life, I actually sunk in just some of the plain metal planetzoo fences, so it looked like just a kind of a footway barrier, essentially a foot height barrier along that grass. So going on to the inside of the habitat, I did decide to continue the asters all the way around the sort of outskirts of the habitat, trying to put it in places where we could kind of see desire lines, as it were, for the leopards or areas where they might walk around the habitat. But I wanted it to feel quite green, and because they don't even like a lot of short grass, let alone long grass, I think this was really needed. Now, I did actually as well decide when I was doing this habitat to actually remove the plant requirements for the animals, just because having these like flowers everywhere is very pretty, and I do actually quite like it, but I wanted to mix in some plain grass as well, and there was nothing suitable which came within their biome and their continent requirements. So I did decide to add in a bit of sneaky buffalo grass, and in order to do that I did decide to turn off the plant requirements. I think sometimes that is pretty restrictive. We could probably turn it on and the animals would still be happy because it doesn't really impact their happiness too much, but just for ease I did decide to turn that one off. And you can see here we're adding lots of ivy and hanging ivy to our big white climbing frames in the middle because I wanted them to blend in a little bit more. They felt way too kind of clean and stuck out a little bit more than I cared for really without the ivy, so I think that's a nice touch. We also then add some plants to our climbing frames, including some saltwort, some little bearberry bushes, and lots more grass here as well. So again, this is one of the places that I did decide to bring in the buffalo grass as well as more of the asters, just to give a little bit of kind of naturalness to these climbing frames, so it didn't feel quite so bare bones. And I wanted this habitat to feel really green, even though it is inside a cage, but I didn't want to fill it up too much with loads of big trees or huge bushes, because I wanted the guest views still to be really good and be able to see through the whole habitat. So grass and kind of low foliage like that really was the way forwards. In terms of the big back white wall, I added a few little bushes in front of it and some smaller trees to help cover that up, and added in saltworts around the habitat as always to add in just a few extra bushes. Now the fountain bamboo came in really handy for this because they're super nice and green and bushy. They've just got a great vibe to them. I absolutely love using these in habitats, and using some of the big clumps of them can help to sort of block some of that very plain white wall at the back, so when guests are viewing from the front it's not too noticeable and it still feels like you're looking into a natural habitat rather than somewhere that is walled in and caged. And then around the water feature, I added in a tree that I really like, which sort of overhangs the water a little bit. So we've angled it. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe leopards would climb up it and sit on the branches overlooking the water. And I also added in this rock, which kind of stuck out for them to sit on, and then lots more rocks around the edge, sticking to our tiger theme so it fits in with the biome and helps to look a little bit more natural and blend into the rest of the zoo as well. I actually didn't mix in different rock types here, so just the tiger, to give the pool a little bit more of a natural rocky effect, although still looking obviously man-made as it would be in such a habitat like this. But I quite like how they stick out a little bit jaggedy over the edge of the pool. I've also added in various enrichment around, so you can see the sprinkler here that we have recoloured to grey to help blend into the stone and the water around it, so it's not so kind of obvious, so that's always a good thing to do with your sprinklers. And then the final touch being underneath the water, buffalo grass. Again, just really like how this looks. It gives a little bit of a green texture as you're looking from outside of the habitat into the water. Just helps to make it feel a bit more real, I think. Like algae and weeds and things growing on the bottom of the pond. So yeah, love how this looks from the outside. So with that, I think we'll dive into the walkthrough and take a little look around. Let's start up here in our main plaza area, and there it is. So yeah, it's a big building. But I think it does sort of sit in quite nicely with the path in the front here. Like, you can't really sort of tell what it is, but it's got that white modern look, exactly like our, well, if the elephant wasn't in the way, our main building over here. It's got that sort of similar vibe, but also obviously having the cage around it. So yeah, let's go down and take a little look. So we'll just zoom around the path around here, because like I mentioned, I love actually the view that you get as you come down the path. Really see it from here, so it's not too obvious from there. But yeah, we'll come down here into the lakeside zone, and then you can see it right in the distance. So it feels like you're walking into a zoo now. We've obviously got our deer stables on the left hand side there. Then as we come down here past the big waterfall, yeah, this view, absolutely love this. Love how this temple wall has worked with all the ivy on it. Yeah, really super pleased with this. You come down here, obviously you've got the deer over here on your left, and the main kind of direction is going to be round that way and looping back round, but here we go. Here is our ginormous leopard habitat. Even though actually it's not too big for the animals, it's actually quite a sensible size. But you can see as you come down here, these temple bricks have worked really nicely. Mix that in with some faux bricks the other side, again, just to keep the guests away from that mesh barring, so there's no nasty accidents happening in there. You can see the asters and the grasses against the gravel path. Okay, we might have missed a little bit there, but yeah, it looks really good. So I'm going to start off over this side. I did create these sort of small, using the 1 meter TV screens, educational boards here. We have got actual educational boards hidden under the ground, so that is all kind of purpose there. You can see the big climbing frame. I actually can't see a leopard right now though. But there we go. They do go everywhere. There are 2 of them in here somewhere. But talking about the bushes at the back, you can see this really covers up this big horrible white wall, so you can still notice it, but much less so. And this big kind of fat bamboo in the middle. Oh, here we go. Here's a leopard jumping right down off the kind of climbing platforms there. Yeah, really pleased with this. The leopards can kind of come up on here, sit right in front of the guests. Oh, like they are doing. So you can get quite a close encounter like this. Oh, is it climbing up to the cave? I wonder. You can see how the bushes are fitted in as well, all low level. Got a slightly bigger one here because it's not intended to stand here in view. Yes, they're using the bridges over to the cave. Okay, let's hurry up here. Let's get round. And here we come up to the glass windows and into the cave. And there is our leopard. That was perfect timing. I have got some of the large education boards here because they fitted in quite nicely with this little wooden border. And there they are. So it's just a plain simple cave. I decided not to kind of cover it in ivy. I was debating that, but I thought this was actually a little bit nicer, a little bit smoother. Oh, someone's tired. Time for a rest. There we go. But yeah, loving this. And also you get quite a good view down over into the deer. I've actually noticed some guests when I opened the zoo standing up here and looking at them, which was funny. But yeah, that's the cave viewing. I really like how the sort of shelter, the sun shelter's worked in here, so you get no glare off the glass as you look in. We'll look inside there. But let's run back down our pathway and take a look at the rest of the habitat. Yeah, I do absolutely think this is one of my favourite habitats I think I've ever done. Really, really love how this slanty kind of walls have turned out. Like this big viewing window here. Really pleased with that, and hopefully the sort of modern art leopard installation has maybe come through. Oh, there's another one over here. But yeah, I've decided to put the big feeding platform right out the front, this being prime viewing area. We've also got the enrichment item over here as well for the hanging meat. So yeah, that's a good one. Is he going into the cave as well? Climbing up over there. So yeah, there's kind of lots of well, he's playing with the box, right? Lots of walkways for them. They can also climb up this stone structure up here. They can of course climb up all of the climbing platforms in the middle. Then we come across to the little pond area as well. Like how the ivy has worked on this, and that's the front of our main viewing area there, and then we can just follow the path round. We have a few little rocks in the flower bed over here. Lovely, lovely. I forget what the name of this tree is, but I absolutely love this. A little pop in colour. Then we come down to this end. I've made sure to put quite a few enrichment items down here just to make sure the leopards do come and use this, and they do swim in the pool. It's really awesome to see. I've also seen a leopard actually sitting on this rock and in this tree as well. So perfect. This tree is also climbable, which would be pretty cool if they went in there for the guests. But yeah, that is the little rock pool area. And then we come on down here, and this is back into our little staff area. So of course I've hidden the staff path under some little stonework there. Added our rope gate, and then we come back, we've got a water tank here for the water, obviously needed. I just decided to put some plaster walls around it, which I think actually it kind of blends into the building, and I don't mind it being outside. I think a big industrial thing like that can look quite nice sometimes. Hello, welcome. Then we come in, we've got our keeper gate, obviously into the habitat through there. We've got a veterinary surgery and a staff room. I do need to recolour our doors and windows, but there we go. Quite a nice little staff area. We can actually come inside the habitat here as well and take a look. So I definitely want to do something with this area. I'm thinking kind of bars and holding pens and that sort of thing, so we will come on to that. But yeah, this is the habitat. Come on round. We've got obviously the sprinklers there. Come out into the main part, and yeah, this huge climbing frame over this side, all adjoined to our centre section as well. And then around the back, it's pretty plain and simple because no one can see it in here, but it's a nice little quiet area the leopards could go if they wanted to get away from people. We actually climb up into their cave. I'm not sure. No, we can't. Right. So yeah, just coming back outside it again. Yeah, just a few little plants here in front of our temple wall. Oh, I did also add a little bench up into the viewing area here as well, so guests could sit up there. And then again, we've got a little staff entrance here. Now this is actually staff path here, so guests I don't think will walk down here. At least there's no viewing from this point, so I don't think that they will. We've got an electric generator as well hidden in the wall here. A little bit of paving just in front of that to cover up the staff path, and then the path does wrap all the way around. Yeah, really like these little windows that side. That is it. So super pleased with how this has come out. I actually really like this little bit of plaster ceiling at the back as well. It kind of helps to extend that out. And then our, well, I would say octagon end, but it's like half an octagon and also not a uniform one at that. And quite a difference to our obviously much more natural, much more rocky deer habitat over there, which is, like I said, what I want to bring into this zoo. So we're going to have the lake out here at the back of this habitat. We'll have other habitats wrapping around the path. The path will kind of circle around the lake, and we'll have habitats all the way around. So next time we're coming onto a habitat in this space, and I won't spoil what animal it is, but please do let me know in the comments what other animals you think we should put in around this lakeside zone. I've still got several spots open, so let me know what you would like to see down in this zone, and we'll get that added. And if you have name suggestions for our lovely leopards, again, let me know. I haven't named the animals yet because I have already built up the next few episodes, so we'll do a big naming session with all of your suggestions coming very soon. But for today, that is going to be it. So if you have enjoyed the video, likes, comments and shares are greatly appreciated. Let me know what you'd like to see in the rest of our zoo, and we'll have a new episode very soon. While you wait for new content, check out one of the videos on screen. But that's it from me for now. Bye bye!